Have you ever been paralyzed? Woken up in the middle of the night, unable to move? Well, this year, it's been happening to me over and over and over again. What causes this phenomenon? Now, I want to approach this on one hand scientifically, and on the other hand, more spiritually. And then maybe bring the two together in the end. Because I think that if we maybe leave the two alone on the sides, we're going to miss out on important things. So anyway, we're going to look at 3 people filming themselves while they are going through sleep paralysis, so that those of you who don't know what I'm talking about can see that this is a real thing and can see what it looks like. Then we're going to look at videos of people describing their experience.
We're coming up on the episode now. It's any second now. You're going to see it. And look at my leg. It's twitching. So I'm starting to wake up, but my eyes aren't open just yet. And so you're going to also start to hear my breathing become more and more labored as I start to panic, basically. And I'm trying to make noise. You can see me shaking just a little bit. My fingers going. Keep an eye on the fingers. And my head as well starts to twitch. I'm trying to speak or call out to the nurses, but it's just coming out as a kind of a snorting snore. There's my finger moving. And my eyes are open now. And you're going to start to see my head try and move. There you go. And this is what it looks like, kind of like a seizure. And you can see my eyes going. And I'm just getting more and more panicked. Eyes are wide open, blinking a little bit. And then finally, it's over. And one last burst of energy, it's gone. So that lasted quite a few seconds, basically about a minute almost. Whoa. So although it's always disturbing to go through episodes.
So there's 1, 2.
This Josh, he's in a sleeping paralysis state right now. The best he could do is shake a bit like that.
Watch the neck.
A little moan. Try to yell, but right now he's in that. Yeah, he's begging for us to get out. He asked me to record him last time.
Josh.
Alright.
Josh.
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 Hey. He's good.
Josh.
He's out.
So I'm going to throw the links in the description, but really just check out the comment section on some of these. It's crazy how many people are experiencing this. The other video had almost 5 million views in, 5 years? I don't know. It's quite a bit. All right, here's number 3.
2 or 3 time week occurrence.
You can hear her moan, trying to wake up.
Right. You can hear she's trying to talk. She can't do it very well.
Pretty creepy. So that's what it looks like externally. You're frozen. Moving on. We're going to take a look at some spooky stories. So I actually experienced that last one where you have a dream within a dream. Inception.
That's it. I eventually got to the point where I would learn to just wiggle myself out of it. And mind you, it's dark. One specific time when it happened, I felt myself about to go to sleep and the light was on. Usually the light's always off. I fell into sleep paralysis. In my body, I couldn't move. So then I proceed to wiggle myself out of the sleep paralysis. So I'm wiggling, right? I looked down. I saw my arm moving out of my arm. My arm was moving pretty much accordingly to every movement that I was making. I was able to see the dresser through my hand. So I'm looking at my hand moving out of my hand. I know that sounds so weird for me to say that, but just bear with me. So I was pretty much aware that I could leave the body. But the reason I didn't get up was because half the time when the sleep paralysis would happen, I would always feel like something was in the room with me, so I would never do it. As I'm doing that, I looked down at my chest, and I really didn't notice it at first. I seen this light coming from my body. The only way I can describe the light, it was like the same color as a diamond, and it was pulsing. There was a line pulsing out of it, like about every 3 seconds, like boom, it would disappear, boom, disappear. It came out to like here, and it was just all around my body, and it was like shimmering, and these lines pulsing through it, almost like a heartbeat. Mind you, at this point, I've never seen a shadow figure. Usually when I'd feel like something was in the room with me, eventually it'd get to the point where I would lay there just terrified. For whatever reason, I would just be terrified, and I would never look around.
One thing to note with this story specifically is the out-of-body experience. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then so here's my favorite source, BuzzFeed. I'm being sarcastic. And we'll just
don't ignore the shadows that lurk in the corner of your
take
eye.
a look at what they have to say.
They're watching you.
Spooky.
The ancient Greeks called them shades. In Korea, the phenomenon is called gawi nulam, which means to be pressed down by a ghost.
Ghost.
Some believe these shadowy creatures are interdimensional beings who
Aliens.
are studying us for reasons unknown. I didn't believe in any of these myths, but the fact that others had experienced what I had made it more real to me.
Spooky.
My parents got divorced, and my mom and I moved from D.C. to Roanoke, Virginia. I had a hard time sleeping in the new place. I was afraid of how quiet it was. I was afraid of the seemingly endless woods that surrounded my house. But mainly, I was afraid that when I laid in bed at night, I wasn't alone.
Spooky.
I couldn't see it at first, but I could feel its presence. Like a low-frequency hum vibrating just under my skin. And then, one night, I saw it. A dark void in the shape of a human. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. It crawled over me, brought its face to mine, and then...
Serves you.
Yeah, so now we're going to move on to, I want to say what's going on inside the brain. Just because we can explain something scientifically, I don't want it to allow us to fall into the false safety net that, we're explaining away the myths of religion and the myths of spirituality because, like for instance, I just think kind of preliminarily, why are these always dark? Why aren't we seeing cute little puppy dogs that are hugging us? And I've heard a couple explanations like the brain has this fear circuit, and so whatever. So they're gonna talk a little bit about the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala being the things that might cause fear. But first, we're going to take a look at Dr. Sanjay Singh from CHI Health's Neurological Institute, and he's going to talk about how your body is paralyzed when you go into rapid eye movement REM sleep. In some of the subsequent videos, we'll talk about how when there's a dysfunction there, you'll still be paralyzed. And so, yeah, here we go.
The other interesting thing that happens when you're dreaming is that your entire body, your arms, your legs are paralyzed, right? And that is important because then you don't act out your dreams, right? Now, that is fascinating by itself, that every night, every human being is being paralyzed 3 or 4 times.
So that was the key right there, is that you're paralyzed as you go into this dream state. So looking at another source here.
During REM, signals are sent to your spinal cord and motor neurons to shut off movement, creating a temporary inability to move the muscles of your arms and legs. This serves as a protective measure to prevent you from injuring yourself or others while you dream. Sleep paralysis is thought to occur due to an error in the flip-flop switch, controlling REM sleep. REM sleep is thought to work as a switch between 2 stages, REM on, when REM occurs, and REM off, when it does not. This mechanism allows for smooth transitions into and out of REM sleep. This REM switch works in opposition to the wake-sleep switch. Normally, REM on occurs at the same time you are asleep. However, when sleep paralysis occurs, the neurons controlling the wake side of the wake-sleep switch and the neurons controlling the REM off side of the REM switch are weakened. This allows the REM on neurons to prevent muscle movement while the body is somewhat awake, which should not be happening. This can cause sleep paralysis. Experiencing negative emotions is another common occurrence during REM sleep. This is because the area of the brain known as the amygdala, which is important in fear processing, is active throughout REM sleep. Since it is active during REM and is closely associated with fear, it is thought to facilitate the generation of anxiety and fear during.
So moving on to our third scientific explanation.
Stuff of nightmares for thousands of years. Stories of this phenomenon can be found all across the world, with supernatural undertones passed on through traditional fairy tales. Canadian Eskimos believed that shamanic spells could paralyze people and induce hallucinations during their sleep. In Japanese culture, kanashibari, kane meaning metal and shibaru meaning to bind or tie, is associated with a sleep demon that strangles the victim while they sleep. Similar tales originate from Brazil, Spain, and China, describing shapeless creatures, intruders, and ghosts as the perpetrators. More modern interpretations are those of alien abductions, often featuring humanoid beings with large bug eyes, carrying out medical or even sexual experiments on their abductees, known as the rapid eye movement or REM phase of sleep. This allows your eyes to continue moving as normal, together with your chest muscles that help you breathe, whilst other voluntary muscle movements like your limbs or your arms and your legs are stopped or inhibited. When REM-based atonia or paralysis intrudes into wakefulness, it causes the dream world and the real world to collide, producing terrifying illusions, hallucinations, and sensations. People who experience sleep paralysis report 3 different types of hallucinations. The first is the incubus. This is the feeling of weight or pressure on the chest whilst being choked or suffocated. The second sensation is that of an intruder in the bedroom. Traditionally, this would be some kind of malevolent presence or spirit, which is personalized and interpreted through visual, tactile, and kinetic cues. And lastly are vestibulomotor hallucinations. That's the feeling of dissociation, or to you and me, an out-of-body experience. Before we continue, it will be useful to move while you're waking. But why do people experience the hallucinations that go with it, specifically that incubus or the out-of-body sensation? The incubus sitting on the person's chest, or the malevolent spirit in the corner of the room that's just watching you, is thought to be attributed to a disturbance in the parietal cortex, an area of the brain responsible for interpreting sensations and perceptions, and integrating what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, and touching with your visual system and plugging that all together. This normally allows you to construct spatially coordinated images that project and integrate with your natural environment. Now, your muscles are a really integral part of this mechanism, and they give your brain some input about what's going on in and around the world around you. But in this case, your muscles are paralyzed, but you're waking up or dozing off. Without this important sensory integration, centers including the right superior parietal lobule and the temporoparietal junction become muddled, and they default to your genetically hardwired body map. In case you've never heard of it, this is something we call the somatosensory homunculus. It's organized by neural pathways that communicate between our sensory organs and the brain. It lays across the cortical surface of the parietal lobe, and in pictures in textbooks, it often looks like a man draped over the brain. And it assigns small sections of the sensory cortex to equivalent areas of your body. This is how the brain processes sensation, and may explain why people with sleep paralysis misattribute human-like shadow illusions to real ghosts and supernatural beings that really feel like they're standing right there. That's all well and good, but what about the vestibulomotor or out-of-body experiences? That's slightly trickier to understand and is completely theoretical. To try and figure this out, we need to talk about serotonin and LSD. Serotonin is an important neurotransmitter that's implicated in mood. Looking at well-established research and findings, serotonin has a really integral role in visual processing, and that's all linked to a receptor in the brain called 5-HT2A, and that's an important piece of this puzzle. As with a lot of our understanding about the brain, we need to look at when the brain goes wrong or when it's diseased. Both schizophrenia and Parkinson's patients show increased densities of these serotonin receptors in the visual cortex, and also report experiencing really odd visual hallucinations or delirious episodes. To add to that, meditation and drug-induced altered states of consciousness are known to cause mystical and intense hallucinations, very similar to what people experience in sleep paralysis. We know that the dissociative feelings or the out-of-body experiences caused by LSD through the 5-HT2A receptor activations may lead to users of LSD attributing increased meaning and personal involvement with otherwise meaningless things like shapes or sounds.
After looking at the scientific explanations for all of this, I just want us to ask a few questions. First, is this the whole picture? Is a purely materialistic view of sleep paralysis what we can believe? What would that mean? So there are no demons, there are no spirits, all of these things that we've seen so far and described, it's simply just a physical manifestation. And, we can easily see it here. There's no demons, there's nothing going on, there's just people having a biological response. The internal world, however, of these people is something quite bizarre. What I'd want us to ask is, are we getting the full picture here? Now, understanding the biology is a key to understanding perhaps the spiritual and what's going on and how there might be an interplay. So, recap, the two main points for why there is such a great extent of fear is that, first, this video at least was saying it's the amygdala that is linked to fear, and that's why there's these types of hallucinations. And second, there's an issue with the prefrontal cortex and I guess how your brain is interpreting the sensory signals from around your body. So on one hand, we have a scientific explanation for sleep paralysis. This scientific explanation shouldn't eradicate the spiritual implications that people are experiencing. Without the spiritual understanding of sleep paralysis, and what I mean by spiritual is the non-physical, the things not necessarily measured by science, I think we're not getting a full picture of sleep paralysis. Because right now we're just being told that this is all a manifestation within the mind. So your mind biochemically is manufacturing the hallucinations. Perhaps that is a negative notion influenced by a naturalistic worldview. So if you're operating out of a purely naturalistic, purely evolutionary, not necessarily, but like a purely naturalistic worldview, complete disregard of spirits, demons, these kinds of things, well, you're going to say, well, this is all explained through biochemistry and hallucinations in the brain. That's it. I would push back and say, what if instead of the brain manufacturing these things, instead we are perceiving something that is really there, perhaps in another realm or another state of being? I'm thinking of Stranger Things. You're seeing the upside down, for example. And so that would be more of a Christian worldview, for example, or I guess a worldview that incorporates spirituality, that is spiritual. For example, the Bible speaks of angels and demons as real entities. Jesus speaks of these things real. And so as a Christian myself, I would say, okay, well, then this isn't just a phenomenon manufactured in the brain. This is something that is real, existing on another plane. And perhaps what's happening within the dream state and within drug use, which he mentions with LSD and some of these things, and we'll get into this later, is perhaps we're participating in witchcraft, perhaps, that is then opening us up to being able to see these other things, or within dreams we're being exposed to another realm. So anyway, we're going to take a look at a more charismatic Christian lady and her description of what's going on. And like I said, I want to pair the scientific explanation, we are explaining the biology of what's happening. But that doesn't rule out the spiritual. So if we're understanding the physical side of things, that doesn't mean we understand the spiritual. Again, if you reject the spiritual, you reject the spiritual side of things. But if we understand the physical, how can the spiritual not contradict that but be interwoven into that? Anyway, enough talk.
Wanted to actually come from the side of me actually believing that this is not just part of the body's natural system, a natural thing that happens to everyone, because it doesn't happen to everyone. Some of you, I've been contacted by people who've been experiencing this for years. Someone told me they've been experiencing it for 9 years of their life, and I was thinking to myself, no, this has got to stop. I don't believe that torment should be part of the Christian life. I don't believe that people should have to go through this and have to accept something that causes so much fear and dread to sleep at night. The Bible actually says that he gives his beloved sleep. God actually desires to give his beloved rest. He doesn't want his children to be tormented through the night. This was before I'd ever experienced sleep paralysis in my life. I once met a guy and he pretty much explained to me that he was having sleep paralysis. He would go to bed. He said that he was sleeping, and a woman would appear, and he would literally not be able to see her, but he could feel like it was a woman. He could sense that it was a woman, and he would literally be stuck, glued, paralyzed to his bed. And this spirit would begin to have sex with him, and he could feel it. Oof. He could literally feel it to the extent that he would actually ejaculate. Because of this experience. And he said that he would literally hear voices in his ear, he could feel breath breathing on his neck. He would hear people running around his room, different sounds, different noises, this and that and the other. So I want to go into a few experiences that I've had with sleep paralysis, and I want to tell you, these experiences again confirm to me that, this is you get sleep paralysis. And I think, what is going on? This makes no sense. What's happening?
So I actually have a friend who described a similar situation that the lady described. So I don't know. How many stories and subjective experiences do we need to have before there's a statistic amount of like, okay, there could be something happening. So anyway, just food for thought.
And there was one time when I went to sleep, and I remember that there was a heavy weight that suddenly came over me, over my nose and over my mouth. I couldn't breathe in my nose, and I could not even breathe out of my mouth anymore. So not only was I paralyzed to my bed, guys, I couldn't breathe and I couldn't smell. I literally was like, in that moment, if Jesus Christ didn't save me, I was going to die. On another occasion, I went to sleep, and what happened was I actually got to open my eyes in the spirit, and I was able to actually see the demon that was afflicting me. It was thin and grey, and it was disgusting.
What?
And it was coming to me. And in the dream that I was having, in the dream I was having, I began to worship. I just began to worship. And the thing is, in this dream, I knew that this demon was coming to me to like press itself against me, like to really push me down. But I just began to worship. I began to worship my God in the dream. And literally my worship was giving off vibrations of power that was coming out of me, vibrations of power. And it literally oppressed this demon so heavily.
So I hope it's pretty apparent by now that we see that there's two different worldviews. One is seeking to explain everything materialistically, and the other acknowledges that there is another realm per se. And I think the comfort of the scientific worldview is that it claims to explain everything. I have a TED Talk I'm going to show later that talks a little bit about this, a little bit more. But for now, suffice to say that we shouldn't let a scientific worldview lull us into a false sense of understanding or security about a certain type of happening or situation. So moving on, guys, I want to give you guys another perspective on aliens, demons, and this whole conversation. Here's Steve Banckers. I actually was introduced to him about 3 years ago on a different YouTube channel. But this guy, he's coming out of the occult movement, and I believe he grew up a Christian, but he really dabbled in a lot of that. But he says some interesting things here that I just want to point out. I really suggest you check out the full podcast here, though.
What changed everything for me was I was watching a program on the History Channel. At the time, it's called Ancient Aliens.
Yes, I know it.
Yeah, it's become kind of a meme, you know, the guy with the crazy, wacky hair and a few other characters on there who are pretty funny. But it basically puts forward the idea that all of these ancient cultures in the past, like the Egyptians, like the Sumerians, like the Babylons, like the Mayans, that what they were trying to describe in their stories, what they're trying to describe in their hieroglyphs, when they talk about, you know, gods and these supernatural beings coming down from the sky, what they're really describing is flesh and blood alien encounters. And they'll show pictures and depictions in these ancient cultures that appear to be spacecrafts or UFOs or alien-looking beings. And their theory is that, okay, well, maybe we're not alone in the universe. Maybe it's actually teeming with life, and maybe this culture is 1 billion or 2 billion years more advanced in terms of their evolution, and they know how to travel through light years in order to get to us. And what we're seeing, all these ancient religions, the reason they started is it's just ancient man trying to, with his primitive mind, understand these alien visitations that he's having. And that to me was, at the time, when I heard that seemed to be incompatible with Genesis. You know, it seemed to be incompatible with six-day creationism. Because I didn't see anywhere where does it say God created the aliens. I didn't see anywhere where, if the Bible says that no man comes to the Father except through Jesus Christ, and, Paul says one thing can be said with certainty, that Christ came to die for sinners. Does that mean that for the tens of millions of planets that have intelligent life on them, did Christ have to go and die an atoning death tens of thousands of times over for each alien planet, and then the Holy Spirit have to dictate to them their own version of Scripture depending on their own unique history? And to me, it was just like, what if that seems like too much to reconcile?
Yeah.
I'd rather just go with what they're telling me and what everyone who believes in ancient knot theory is telling me, that Christianity is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle of man trying to understand this infinite intelligence that is God. And so when you start researching aliens,
Yes.
for anybody who does this, you know that very quickly you get into stuff that's not just aliens. You're not researching aliens anymore because you start getting into what's called contact material, where these alien beings end up giving material to mankind. They're saying things to people. When people are having alien abduction experiences, whether or not they're actually they're real and correspond to reality is a second issue, or how we can understand that's a second issue. But the point is, people believe that they're experiencing these things with these alien beings, and these alien beings are always giving them information, and the information is always spiritual in nature. It's always spiritual philosophy, and it's always reinforcing the intrinsic deity of man, that man's divine, that man's an aspect of the creator, and that all the suffering in the world is a response, is a response to man's own self-ignorance. That he doesn't know who he is. He's forgotten that he's a little god. He's forgotten that he's one with the creator. And so all of this suffering, all of this chaos in the world is because we have separated ourselves from unity consciousness. And so this is called pantheism.
So you got right into pantheism immediately.
Coming out of the New Age movement, and he talks a lot about this in his own testimony. He just calls it what it is. The aliens are demons, and it's really, we've got two competing worldviews here. We have one that says, well, religion is just a explanation of what we now know as aliens, and he's saying no, it's the other way around. Actually, these things have always been demons, no matter what they masquerade as, and so we see this worldview clash. So now I want to take a look at some quotations from the Bible regarding a deep sleep, which I think could be comparable maybe to what we're describing as sleep paralysis, or at least where God communicates. We'll take a look at this here. Job 4:13-16, and thoughts from the visions of the night when deep sleep falleth on man. Fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face, the hair of my flesh stood up. I stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying. And the demon goes on to speak false doctrine about God in this specific instance. And here we have actually God bring a deep sleep upon Abraham, deep sleep with Adam. Daniel 10:8, therefore I was alone and saw the great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me into corruption, and I retained no strength, so paralyzed. A deep sleep on my face. Kind of in summary, we have God, being able to use this deep sleep, communicating to man. God, it does not always cause deep sleep. We see this a few times. Man can receive visions or actual spirits, so there's something here. Just play a couple snippets from a couple TED Talks that I'd like, kind of talking about this tension between science and religion.
The science delusion is the belief that science already understands the nature of reality in principle, leaving only the details to be filled in. This is a very widespread belief in our society. It's the kind of belief system of people who say, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. It's a belief system which has now been spread to the entire world. But there's a conflict in the heart of science between science as a method of inquiry based on reason, evidence, hypothesis, and collective investigation, and science as a belief system or a worldview. And unfortunately, the worldview aspect of science has come to inhibit and constrict the free inquiry, which is the very lifeblood of the scientific endeavor. Since the late 19th century, science has been conducted under the aspect of a belief system or worldview, which is essentially that of materialism, philosophical materialism. And these sciences are now wholly owned subsidiaries of the materialist worldview. I think that as we break out of it, the sciences will be regenerated.
I think it's an excellent TED Talk. It was actually banned, so it's not on TED Talks. Re-uploaded again since TED's censored Rupert Sheldrake along with Graham Hancock and removed the video from TEDx YouTube channel. They dared to question the scientific orthodoxy, and for that they have been publicly castigated and defamed. Wow. So check this out. I'll have the link. But he kind of just hits the nail on the head regarding this science religion kind of thing. Really seeing how science has been overtaken by materialism. I was using the term naturalism earlier, but just, what is physical is all that there is. Well, how do you know that? Anyway, moving forward, I want to get a couple quotes from another TEDx talk by Brian Enderle.
What I believe is that science and God, as I have understood them, go together. They're integrated. And even more so, with the advent of modern science in the last 100 years or so, it's actually helped us make some connections of those seemingly mystical qualities about God.
So he actually talks about how probability and some of these different things help us understand the omnipresence of God, the omniscience of God. It's actually worth a watch here. I just thought I'd mention it. And then last here, we have, I don't know if he's a Christian, this guy, but he makes some interesting comments about different ways of processing, logical processing versus like an empathetic processing.
Neuroscience shows us that there's a fight between two types of reason, not between dumb intuition and true reason, but a fight between two types of reason that are aimed at different types of truth. On the one hand, there's cold, detached, logical, analytic reason. On the other hand, there's a warmer, fuzzier type of social and emotional reason that leads to insight.
I just threw that stuff out there for you guys to check out. Sometimes we're posed with the false dichotomy between science and religion, say Christianity. And I would say as a Christian that's completely false. When we go in to answer, say, a practical just a simple practical question like, what is sleep paralysis? Our worldview makes the biggest difference. If we're coming from a materialistic worldview, we might not get the full picture. Just leaving things as, saying this is all just something manufactured in the brain, but maybe missing out on the point that maybe this isn't manufactured in the brain at all. See, they're assuming that. What if this is a perception issue and there is another dimension per se, which we're peering into? Anyway, just piggybacking off of what Steve was saying earlier about aliens and demons kind of being linked, I wanted to take a look at a very popular alien or demon. Who's this? Oh wait, let's get our hats on. Alright, protect us from the radiation. So here's a lamb. This was Aleister Crowley's spirit guide. Kind of looks like an alien, right? Well, and what's her name? She said looked like an alien. I think that's kind of an interesting little coincidence, because here we have this interplay of is it a demon, is it an alien? And depending on your worldview, it depends on what you're saying here. So anyway, so he was an occultist. He came up with the Book of the Law in the religion of Thelema. The famous saying, "Do what thou wilt." He was on the Beatles album cover actually. If you'll see him in the back corner. He was a drug addict. He influenced Jack Parsons, who later founded JPL, Jet Propulsion's lab. And one of the things that he believed specifically was that magic was a middle path between science and religion. I think that's so interesting because the more you see, the more I've researched occult and all this stuff. Oh, what's that? What? Elite occult groups? Masons? Good thing I have my tinfoil hat on. The point is that you start to realize that there seems to be this linkage between occult rituals and this kind of stuff and I guess technology. And so this is a video for another time. I just thought it was interesting to bring up at this point because it does illustrate the point that there's this crossover between, what is this, North Carolina abduction case sketch? Oof. So, again, there's this striking similarity between, what are we calling these things? Okay, enough of that. On an ending note, I was going to talk about how drugs can open your mind to, again, what I was saying, is this a delusion in the head or is this a perceiving another reality, kind of like Upside Down?
A woman named Lori Potarf and her friend Richard Lee Henderson,
what a name, were
arrested for drug possession in Duncan, Oklahoma. And it appeared to be an open and shut possession case. But as Raw Story explains, quote, Potarf told police that she is a practicing Wiccan and she has a religious right to use crystal meth in the sacred rituals of her faith.
I thought that was worth mentioning because drugs and witchcraft have been, pharmakia, as it's called. The Bible associates witchcraft and drugs very closely together because of this kind of interdimensional whatever the heck's going on. So again, worth mentioning, thought I'd throw that out there. Some things that you guys might be interested in reading. The Veil by Blake K. Healy, quite a book. Probably won't agree with most of what he says, but guy who claims to be able to see spiritual things. It's worth a read if you're interested in that kind of stuff. And then here's kind of a fun little blog thing that I found. Are aliens really fallen angels? So I don't know, kind of talks about that. And if you really want to get your tinfoil hat on again, you can check this out. Really interesting video. So after going through all the content and editing the video, I feel like I gave off a kind of impersonal or distant vibe about this whole thing. And I realized why. These experiences are quite scary for people, especially for me when I first started to experience them. In fact, people who have been touched or seen things, it's more than a hallucination. Specifically when they're recurring. That's why I'm not in favor of a purely naturalistic outlook. The similarities of these dreams corresponding to each other, it meshes more with the Christian worldview of angels and demons than just hallucinations in the mind. It's also interesting to see that there's an uptick of these things, specifically when, for myself, like the one lady said, you're finding perhaps change or victory in your life over sin. I know for me, as I started to make some big changes in my life, I know that especially in this last year, started to experience more sleep paralysis. And I've never seen anything, but I've always felt presence, like a cold presence. I felt something once. But I don't fear anymore. I don't fear it anymore because I really do trust in Jesus. And every single time that these things happen, like, there really is power in the name of Jesus. And some people on the internet say, I said the name of Jesus and it did nothing. Blake Healy talks about this. As a kid, he used to experience night terrors for years. And he said it was in conjunction with what he says his spiritual gift of being able to see in the spirit. But he said the name of Jesus and nothing happened. So I was just going to end and say, I sleep at night with peace now. I think just the other night I actually had some sort of sleep paralysis experience. Whether it was like in a half dream state, I'm not quite sure. But I have complete peace with them because I know that God is with me. I really do. And it's given me such peace this entire time. The one thing that's very interesting is there's a lot of times where I sense that I can bring it upon myself. And it really depends on fear. It's such an interesting thing. I'll be awake and conscious and even at times able to move completely. There was one time I was completely able to move. I remember this. And it was like there was a fear meter inside of me. And if I let myself fear, then it was like something jumped on me and I became paralyzed. I remember this happened once specifically when I was fully conscious and able to move. It was a very strange thing. When I'm confident in my belief that I am completely protected by God, that He has my back, nothing's wrong. And when I'm confident in that, there's no problems. But when I start to slip and I fear, what if something happens? It's so interesting. And I'll open myself up. I get a little scared. That it's like a door that gets opened. So I just say, for those of you who don't experience this, great. For those of you who do, I really pray that you would, whether you're a Christian or not, realize that the creator of the world has power over these things. And I wanted to address the scientific worldview because to me it paints a half picture. It compartmentalizes everything into the human mind rather than acknowledging that there is an external world beyond what our eyes can see. And that's something you have to decide for yourself whether you believe that or not. For those of us who have experienced these things, some are worse than others. I don't think mine are nearly as bad as what others have experienced. Remember that there is a God who has control of these things. His name is Jesus, and ask Him for help because He's willing to help. And so I just pray that you guys sleep well, and God bless.